The fact that people are honestly saying that Dark Phoenix is the worst film in the X-Men saga tells me that not enough of us have seen X-Men Apocalypse. Although it may not be as pointless as X-Men Origins Wolverine or as incompetent as The Last Stand, Apocalypse takes my vote for the worst film in the series. After X-Men Days of Future Past came out, I was on cloud 9. One of my favorite X-Men films had just come out, and there was so much promise for the franchise to finally live up to the expectations that I'd always had for it. In retrospect, there were many warning signs before the film came out that it would in fact suck, but I didn't pay attention to those. The first was the fact that Apocalypse was announced as a sequel to Days of Future Past, complete with a release date before Days of Future Past even came out. This didn't seem big at the time, but it was important. Apocalypse was released just 2 years after Days of Future Past, which is a very short time in which to make a movie, especially from a writing and development perspective. According to Bryan Singer's social media, the film was first being developed in 2013 December and continued throughout the spring and summer until the fall when casting and pre-production started in earnest. This might have been enough time if the X-Men franchise was as much of a well-oiled machine as the MCU is, but, well, yeah. It also bears mentioning that 20th Century Fox was on a perpetual time crunch to keep making X-Men movies, since the nature of their deal with Marvel Entertainment created a perpetual doomsday clock for the financial success of their entire movie studio. No pressure there. This, combined with the chaotic inner workings of the Fox X-Men franchise, guaranteed nothing but success. None of this, of course, would mean that the film was dead on arrival. What it meant was that there was no room for error. Whatever ideas the creative team came up with, good or bad, were the ideas that the film was going to go for. Part 1. A bad idea. X-Men Apocalypse, along with its more competently executed Marvel twin, Avengers Infinity War, shares the plot structure of bad guy shows up and then everybody reacts to him. Except in Infinity War, Thanos doesn't spend the first half of the movie fucking around doing nothing of importance. And instead of focusing on that, Apocalypse instead focuses on the 2 generations of boring supporting characters for an hour until Apocalypse shows up. But let's talk about him first anyway. Apocalypse is just a terribly written character. I'm sure there are more creative ways to put that, but I don't care. That Simon Kinberg was paid $8 million to write this shit shows that there really is no justice in this world. In the comics, which I have not read, and the cartoon, which I have watched, Apocalypse uses telepathy to possess the powers of mutants whom he chooses as his followers. In the film, he just makes speeches at them to make them evil. Simon Kinberg and director Bryan Singer, more on that later, decided to make Apocalypse more human. Instead of being an all-powerful god, he's more like a weird cult leader.
What's that? Some short, stubby-looking blue guy wearing a skirt with pipes coming into his head, blue, leathery skin, and forehead bumps? Now that's the kind of man I would follow to my death and defend from my friends, even the ones that I've known for 20 plus years. All he'd have to do is just shout a cheesy speech at me, and I'd be there.
Who the fuck are you?
The direction that Apocalypse goes with its villain is more of a tell-don't-show approach, where Apocalypse himself doesn't really do that much to prove how powerful he is, aside from kill a couple guys. So instead, we have Rose Byrne give exposition about how dangerous he is, and then he gives long-winded speeches about how dangerous he is, in vaguely but not explicitly biblical terms, and then we all call it good. Look, I get that Apocalypse is a powerful villain with a wide variety of powers, but the least you could do is explain a little bit more clearly why he's so dangerous in the hours of exposition you gave us, or at least something more specific than vague blah blah blah, power of the strongest blah blah blah, Tower of Babel. I know that, like, manipulating molecules, size growing is a little bit wordy for a comic book movie, but you could try. Some of these speeches verge on the downright comical when you stop to think about them for more than half a second. Take the sequence where Apocalypse hijacks Cerebro to launch all the nukes on the planet. We, as the audience, know that he is in Professor X's mind, scanning all the things, and we see all the military guys freaking out at all the launches going into space, but His horsemen in the warehouse don't see that.
Hey, looking good, Angel. Nice suit. Like the sword, Psylocke. Can I call you Psy? Hey, what do you think? Hey, I'm here to... Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm here to apply for the 5th horseman position. I've got my resume here somewhere. I haven't got it on my bed. I brought it with me. I'll find it in a moment. And I can provide references upon request if you want. What do you think Aproc is going to give me as cool powers? I'm sorry, that's what I call apocalypse. Because it's like, we go back so far, we know each other all the way back to the 5 hours that he's been away since he woke up from his nap. Sorry, power now.
No!
That's just a little joke, I tell.
No more superpowers.
So much faith in that.
Man, this speech is going on forever.
You can fire your arrows from the Tower of
Who
Babel.
do you think he's talking to?
You can never strike God!
The choice to cast Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse has to be one of the most insulting and bizarre decisions in the X-Men franchise. I would really like to know whose decision it was to cast a Guatemalan American actor as an ancient Egyptian instead of, you know, an actual man of Egyptian or Arab descent. But Oscar Isaac isn't a white guy, so it's okay. Oscar Isaac is horribly miscast as guy covered in makeup with a voice filter on. Oscar Isaac is a very charismatic actor, but he's smothered underneath a layer of latex and forehead ridges. He looks less like a pharaoh of ancient Egypt than he looks like Ivan fucking Ooze.
Did it look something like this?
Ew, gross.
Too kind. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the galactically feared, globally reviled, universally despised. They call me Ivan Ooze.
And at least that show knows it's silly. We're supposed to take this man seriously when he's covered in the silliest costume known to man. I admire the creative decision to make Apocalypse a live-action character when all the similar characters like Thanos and Steppenwolf were entirely computer-generated. But if you're gonna do that, at least hire an actor with some height or some imposing presence to him. Instead of hiring somebody with bulk, they hired Oscar Isaac, who is 5'8". He's my height, and I'm not physically imposing at all.
You need a pilot. I need a pilot.
When girls get all hot and bothered about Oscar Isaac, they stare at his charming grin and his handsome face and his beautiful eyes, and you covered that shit up with blue paint. Either you hire someone who can work with the makeup instead of being restrained by it, or you do motion capture, which, to be fair, they did for one scene, and that's the only scene where Apocalypse actually looks like he should. The biggest problem of the film's structure is that it spends way too much time on the supporting cast and the main characters, while Apocalypse and his shenanigans, which should be the main focus, are downgraded to the subplot for the first 2/3. Simon Kinberg's screenplay tries to have its cake and eat it too by updating us on all of our old characters and introducing all of these new main characters while also having Apocalypse do stuff in the background. The result is a movie with an hour-long first act and a non-existent second act. And don't even try to ask me who the main character is. Unlike Avengers, you couldn't even say that Thanos or Apocalypse is the main character, since he does so little in the movie that I would call it laughable to call him anything resembling a main character. The movie isn't one coherent story so much as it is a string of subplots that just happen at the same time, I guess. We have our main characters from X-Men First Class still kicking around. Mystique is famous from saving the president 10 years ago, which apparently solved racism single-handedly, and she doesn't like it. She feels angsty about being a proper hero, and she just wants to be able to awkwardly elbow people in the face in peace.
Sorry! Oh my god!
Professor X is boring as ever, schooling kids about stuff, and Magneto is off raising chillins in Poland whom die when all of his powers are exposed. All of this is a waste of space. Mystique's character arc was done in Days of Future Past. What more does she have to do here? She doesn't even get any cool fight scenes. It's no mistake that Simon Kinberg saw her as the expendable one in Dark Phoenix. I'd say spoilers, except I don't think you care. Reportedly, Simon Kinberg decided to give Magneto a family based on a conversation he had with Michael Fassbender on an airline flight about which direction he wanted to go with the character. Which, to be fair, isn't a half-bad idea for a solo Magneto movie, which they almost did 10 years before this. If only we could have gotten that instead of shoving it here into 5 minutes of a 2.5-hour movie. The result of cramming this story into such a small amount of time ends up in Simon Kinberg giving into the most backward of Hollywood tropes, being giving a male a family just so he can fridge them to make him sad for the rest of the movie. Hey, Eric and Deadpool from Deadpool 2 should start a support group to recover from the trauma of fridged spouses. They could call it the conveniently cliched Dead Spouses Social Club for Moody Men. This whole movie is full of bizarre, incomprehensible creative choices like that one. If you stop to think about any scene in the movie for more than 2 seconds, it starts to make no sense. Its internal logic is flimsier than a paper balloon. Speaking of flimsy, let's talk about Cyclops and his friends. Apparently this movie was supposed to be the handing of the torch movie where he shifts the focus from the first class to the next generation. That might have been true, except it's not. You remember all that stuff I talked about 5 minutes ago about how the old class still have character arcs? Yeah, well, that distracts from giving any time to the newbies. But let's talk about them anyway, because you came for blood, and I'm gonna give it to you. The young X-Men we meet in this movie are Storm, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Jubilee. Jubilee was only ever in one scene and they cut that from the movie anyway, so she's basically a non-entity. Jean Grey, on the other hand, suffers from the apocalypse syndrome of telling and not showing. We are constantly told by her and the other characters around her that she's dangerous and she doesn't have her powers under control when she demonstrably does. We're told everybody's scared of her following the opening scene with her, where she just uses her powers to gently and calmly pick up some papers that were spilled. That doesn't spell danger to me. And then she has a bad dream and Professor X wishes it better instead of reassuring all the other students of his school that everything's fine after a worldwide earthquake.
Hey, Charles, Professor X, sorry. Charlie, can I call you Charlie? Sorry to interrupt, but, Amara got acid reflux and threw up all over her roommate, and, got magma everywhere, and, she moved it back, so, she's not currently being burned, but she got burned really badly, and, also, the floor is kind of on fire, and we can't find a fire extinguisher or, the keys to the X-van to bring her to the hospital, and, we totally could use your help for, a really quick second. So, when you're done tucking Jean into bed, could you, help us out real please? Thanks a lot. Good night, Jean.
You'll have nothing to fear.
You're still scared of me. Hey, I have special glasses now.
They're not scared of you, they're scared of me. You're not the only one who can't fully control your powers.
Cyclops is even more of a non-entity here than he was in the original movies. I happen to quite like Ty Sheridan as an actor. In fact, all of the actors in the X-Men movies are phenomenal and far too good to be in those movies. If you want to see Ty Sheridan give a real performance, go and watch Dark Places. Hey, remember that time when Hit Girl had a relationship with Cyclops, and then Cyclops grew up to be Yellow Jacket, and then Yellow Jacket's sister was Furiosa?
Weird movie.
Well, we're not talking about that today because apparently he decided it's too good.
We were gonna watch Dark Places for episode 3. That's what it's called, right?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
We stopped halfway through because I kept going, this movie is too, competent. This movie knows what it's doing too well.
The meet-cute between Jean and Scott is the most flaccid interaction I've ever seen. Jean is written in this movie to be so internalized, and Scott is just so bland and boring that I can't see any reason for these two to be together. Although that's par for the course in these comics. The only scene in which they did have any chemistry was cut.
Yeah. No, thanks, Scott.
Oh, come on.
You're an asshole. Thank you so much.
In other news, Nightcrawler also does nothing. He does have a cool fight with Angel in a cage and is generally a very useful member of the team, but they don't give him any time to emote or express any internality of himself. I never thought I'd say this, but this really makes me wish for the days of Alan Cumming.
I'm coming.
Let's transition to talking about the Horsemen with Storm. Another consequence of the change in Apocalypse's character is the character of Storm. Because Apocalypse never mind controls people, he has to convince them to join his side. Magneto he convinces because of the fridging of his wife and daughter. Psylocke and Angel he convinces because they're evil and like fighting. Storm he convinces because, well, I don't really know. She's supposed to be poor, but she also lives in this really nice house in Cairo with the TV and food and everything. She idolizes Mystique, but that's about all we learn about her. She then joins him because she had nothing better to do, I guess. Then she sees Apocalypse choking Mystique in that moment that got a bunch of feminists work up, and then she has a change of heart? Except it's so sudden that it doesn't make any sense. Then she decides to stay with the X-Men because she has nothing better to do now, and Professor X got her a green card, so now she owes him 4 years of back wages. Since we're talking about the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse, let's circle back to Apocalypse's plan. It makes no sense. After being woken up by Moira McTaggart, gee thanks Moira, he embarks on a search for the mutant allies to make into his Horsemen because he has a flair for theatricality and Bible references? Really, there's absolutely no reason for him to do this. In fact, there's no reason for any of his action. He discovers that Professor X exists an hour into this 2.5-hour movie, and then the plot finally starts when he decides to kidnap him because he wants his powers. I can understand that. I too want to steal Xavier's powers.
Let me kill myself!
No!
Let me end it all!
No!
Let me end it all! I'm
You
tired
will
of
not!
this horrible existence.
You will. But then he builds this whole temple thing in Cairo and makes Magneto start destroying the Earth with magnetism while making James McAvoy shave his head in order to build this new world order. It sounds like Apocalypse, or maybe the screenwriter who wrote the movie, was making this up as he went along. In the cartoon, he recruited the Horsemen because he needed guardians for all of his giant pyramid things while his plan was being executed, since he would just be inside pressing the buttons. You know, it almost feels like, and I don't want to accuse the screenwriter of not reading the comic books, but it almost feels like the screenwriter looked up Apocalypse on Wikipedia, found out that he recruited 4 horsemen and wanted to destroy the world, and then just decided to call it a day. I might be saying that, but I'm also not saying that. Man, it almost feels like this movie was just written over a weekend because they needed to start shooting the new X-Men movie on Monday and they didn't want to move the release date. It's such a mess of a screenplay that it would almost make more sense if it wasn't even finished when they started filming, so they had to rewrite it as they went. Oh wait, it was exactly that. For the record, the writer also insists in the same article that it was because they focused on special effects and spectacle over character. I would buy that if the special effects didn't look like ass.
But you do now. That's what I've come here to tell you.
You happy with that? Because that seemed weird.
One of the best kept secrets in Hollywood was, up until recently, just how much of a terrible person to work with Bryan Singer was. Granted, we all knew for the longest time that he was a sex pervert, but nobody in Hollywood cared about that until Empire magazine threatened to release an article about it. What I'm talking about is how Bryan Singer, Hollywood director, is an immature baby man whose work was largely done by those around him. As mentioned previously, the film was still being rewritten while it was being filmed, which is painfully obvious. Another painfully obvious fact is how poorly directed this film is. It reminds me of X3 in that respect, but somehow worse. Brett Ratner was simply incompetent. At least he showed up and did his job. Apparently working on all of these reboot X-Men films have been chaotic and terrible. All 4 have required heavy reshoots. Both First Class and Dark Phoenix completely reworked their third acts. See? Even good movies get reshoots sometimes. Meanwhile, Days of Future Past and Apocalypse had the unfortunate distinction of being directed by Bryan Singer. Even on Days of Future Past, Bryan Singer was known to show up late or not show up at all for days of shooting, Tommy Wiseau style. He was immature and would start crying or shouting if his creative decisions were questioned. He would disappear from set, and his director of photography, his editor, or his producers would repeatedly direct the movie for him until Bryan Singer decided to return. His behavior was so bad that longtime X-Men producer Lauren Schuler-Donner left the series after Days of Future Past, citing creative differences. This was hushed up, however, by the fact that she received producer credit for both Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix despite doing no work on either film. Bryan Singer's behavior only got worse on Apocalypse. The absences grew longer, and Bryan Singer was known to fly in his friends to Montreal where they were filming, and he'd take them around town instead of filming. He was very brittle and would not respond well to questions or comments or challenges from others. Sophie Turner, echoing Rami Malek's comments on working with him on Bohemian Rhapsody, said that working with the director on Apocalypse was a terrible experience. And you can see it on screen. The quality of the direction is just so much worse than in any other X-Men film. The blocking is lazy and cheap. A lot of the scenes feel weird, and the best explanation I can come up with is that they didn't get coverage for the whole scene, so it just plays on 1 or 2 camera angles. Important lines are said off-screen in crappy voiceover.
Is he okay?
It's his energy, he's drained. His energy, he's drained.
Many of the X-Men, especially Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult, feel like they're acting on autopilot, and I don't blame them. Who would care about this piece of shit? Only people like Michael Fassbender, who give good performances no matter what they're in, do well here despite the shit material they're given. The fight choreography is the worst I've seen in a modern superhero film. Just look at this scene where Angel is defeated by a piece of rebar.
I'll feed us in.
Or this bit.
There's a scene where because Storm is a horseman of the apocalypse at the time, he's trying to catch her in one. So you gotta put the clip on screen, okay? She's flying away and he's chasing her with his laser beam eyes. He's like missing. He's like just shooting behind her while she runs away. And I'm thinking, if it's his eyes, how is he missing? He just has to look at her. He just has to look. He just has to point his eyeballs. Why is he looking behind her? How does Cyclops miss? He should never miss. He just needs to look at it. He just needs to look.
Or this bit. To be fair, I can't blame all of this on Bryan Singer, but it does stink of a film with nobody in charge. The whole movie is just so lazily constructed and put together that it could have been a Star Wars prequel for all I know. One can only speculate on why Bryan Singer was rehired for Apocalypse after being so difficult on Days of Future Past, but the best I can come up with is that Singer managed to convince the studio that his name would sell movie tickets. He might have said that it worked on Days of Future Past, didn't it? Which outgrows First Class by $400 million. A Birth Movie's Death Report in 2014 said that Fox wanted Singer off Apocalypse, fearing repercussions from his then current round of sexual assault allegation. Perhaps once those blew over, he used that to end up securing the gig. Look, I'm innocent. You got no reason to let me not direct the movie. Either way, he ended up in the director's chair, even though he gave every intention throughout filming the last film that he didn't want to be there. Maybe it's just that he's really good at pitching. After all, he managed to get back at directing a movie for Fox with Bohemian Rhapsody after having embarrassed them twice on Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, and then convincing Millennium Media to give him Red Sonja after being fired from Bohemian Rhapsody for being such a shitty person to work with. Man, I'm sure glad that he's not directing that movie anymore. Films like X-Men Apocalypse are rare. Usually, if you're lucky, only a few things go wrong on a film. With X-Men Apocalypse, it was the perfect storm of bad. An uneven director doing everything he could to make the movie miserable to work on, a studio breathing over the filmmakers' necks to adapt a complex, bizarre story as quickly as possible, and a bunch of writers with no idea what to do, still rewriting the script as it was filming. If there's anything we've learned from the Dark Phoenix debacle, is that nobody has been at the wheel of 20th Century Fox for a long time, especially when it came to the X-Men movies. I'm even more appreciative now of when these movies were good, given the absolute chaos and hell it was to work on them. To keep working on these films and making them good, despite all of the nonsense, shows just how much everybody involved cared about this property. The X-Men franchise, despite whatever setback it is currently suffering when you watch this video, continues to contain enormous potential. Just look at that leaked B script idea. There's so many different stories you can tell in this universe that don't have to revolve around Professor X, Magneto, or the ego of Bryan Singer. But instead of doing any of those things, they did the least creative option. Because of the incompetence of 20th Century Fox executives, the ego of Bryan Singer, and 1,000 other factors, that didn't happen. And now the X-Men are practically gone. The worst thing a movie can be, in my book, is boring. If something is really bad or really good, I can get a lot out of it. Instead of getting something really good or really bad in Apocalypse, you just get a confused mess. And these are the movies I truly hate. The kind where there's so much potential that is just wasted. And that's what makes X-Men Apocalypse so insulting. It doesn't bother to be bad in an interesting way. I actually enjoyed it the first time I saw it, but then again I also liked Star Trek Into Darkness the first time I saw it. Now the only fun I'll get out of it is just the fun I got when writing this review, nitpicking the hell out of it. The flimsy logic of this film can make for some fun MS3TK style riffing. Apart from that, the film just feels like an insult. It's an insult to the fans like myself who have been waiting so long and hoping for something good and new in this series. It's an insult to the victims of Bryan Singer. It is a monument to the fact that powerful men in Hollywood can still continue to abuse and exploit those beneath them with little to no retribution despite the Me Too movement, although they might be changing a little bit. Because of all of this, it is probably my least favorite X-Men movie. I still enjoy parts of X-Men Last Stand. X-Men Origins Wolverine doesn't offend me like this, and I actually liked Dark Phoenix, goddammit. I have nothing else to say except fuck this movie. Fuck you, X-Men Apocalypse, and fuck you too, Bryan Singer. Did I pass this entire review without mentioning Wolverine? Yeah, I did, because Wolverine had nothing to do in this movie and really shouldn't have been there. Okay, bye.